We're going to call the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee to order. We have a quorum: Mr. Weezer, Mr. Smith, Mr. Rosendahl, myself, Bernard Parks, as chair. Mr. Corretz is on his way, and the first item is going to be a joint meeting of Personnel Committee and the Budget and Finance Committee. While waiting the arrival of Mr. Corretz, colleagues on the Budget Committee, if we can dispense with items 3, 4, 5, and 6. 3, 4, and 5 are lean items. If there are questions regarding any of those items, we'd have to go in closed session to get into the specifics, but otherwise we can move them on consent.
I'm comfortable with consent, but that's just me.
Okay. All right, we'll move those. And then also on the item 6 is basically a motion just to request information regarding reward motion, so we can approve that on consent also.
Yep.
Okay. And so as soon as Mr. Corretz comes in, we can, well, while we're waiting, why don't we do should be item 2 on the Budget and Finance Committee, and also
7.
item 7. We can go through those while waiting. So item 2.
Item 2 is a City Administrative Officer report dated May 13, 2011, relative to an update on the status of labor negotiations with all bargaining units in relation to the 11-12 proposed budget.
And you've given us an updated chart?
Yes, this is an updated chart that I've handed out. It basically covers the latest status with all of our bargaining units in negotiations.
Colleagues, any questions on the updated chart or the original motion?
I have none. No.
Jose?
No.
Okay, so we'll move that item with the updated chart as provided in committee. Now, item 7.
Item 7 is a motion, Weezer Corretz, regarding the reimbursement of project costs for the Valley Boulevard grade separation project.
Could you give us an overview? We held this last week just to get some clarity on the cost, and specifically the impact on the general fund.
Okay. The excuse me. The Valley Boulevard grade separation project is 100% completed. We're in post-construction, finalizing some change orders, and just getting some administrative items in line. We have enough money to pay off the contractor, but because of some basically a little over a year delay, we are behind on salary costs. Because we're behind on salary costs, what we're asking for in the motion is to go ahead and pay. We have some money left over, but not enough to cover everything. We're about $1.64 million behind on salary costs. What we would like to do is have council approval to go ahead and pay off this fiscal year's salaries with the remaining funds, and as well as next year's, which is very minor, and then whatever is left over, we would reimburse past year's salaries. There's not a hole there. They have been made whole from their salary accounts, but in order to move the project forward and the project doesn't owe anything, we'd like to waive those past reimbursements and just continue excuse me, to pay with what we have, and then anything left over, we will reimburse what we can. It just won't be complete reimbursement.
The source of the funds?
I'm sorry?
The source of the funds.
The source of the funds? It's mostly an MTA grant. There is also some money from UPRR. There's also some gas tax money in there, and there's also, of course, Prop C match money. There's quite a few sources because we were really scrambling around to make this project work.
Okay. And so from your earlier comments, if I understand the notes, there's roughly about $3.215 million that are unpaid. You're recommending that we pay 1.575.08 1.82 in current salaries, and that the Bureau of Con Ed and Bureau of Engineering will absorb the 1.640.
That's correct.
Okay? And then also, we'd like to also instruct the CEO to ensure that, that there are no other costs that will impact the general fund.
That's correct.
So you got anything? I cover
Yeah.
your motion?
Yeah, thank you. And this was a motion that was requested by BOE as a closeout item on this. And I just want to thank BOE and all departments involved. It's a very important bridge that will, most importantly, provide easier access for the fire department to be able to reach a part of our city that is landlocked by other political jurisdictions, and also provide access for people coming into the city from the San Gabriel Valley. Not to mention the over 20-minute wait that a lot of the local residents would have to make waiting for the train to pass by. So I want to thank BOE for your work on this. And as I understand it, some of this came out as a result, or some of these costs came as a result of unforeseen circumstances. And whatever costs BOE handles, it's not going to affect the general fund. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's why we want to do it this way, so that we don't affect the general fund this fiscal year or next.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for your work.
Mr. Smith? Nothing. Chris? Okay, we'll move that item with that information. Now we can go to item 1, which is the Joint Committee of Budget and Finance and Personnel. And we have 4 members of Budget and Finance, Mr. Weezer, Mr. Smith, all 5 members of Budget and Finance, Mr. Rosendahl, Mr. Kretz, myself, Bernard Parks as chair, and there's 2 members of Personnel. Mr. Kretz is the chair, and myself as a member. So we can bring item 1.
Item 1 is a report from the Office of Finance, Interim Treasurer, and the City Administrative Officer relative to an operation and implementation plan for the consolidation of finance and the Office of the Treasurer.
And then, let me just ask one, just hold that seat there. Miss Diane Williams has a card coming up.
Hello.
Afternoon, you have 2 minutes.
Hello, council members. I'm president of Local 3672. That's the executive administrative assistants. And basically, we are the right hand of the general managers and act on their behalf in their absence. I'm here specifically to talk about the position that was eliminated in Treasurer's Office, and that's the 3 position that supported the general manager of that department. As a result of this elimination, there's a trickle effect because that person has seniority over the 2 position, which means that 2 position needs to go somewhere. Well, we all know that a lot of the positions have been eliminated, and now she has nowhere to go but to revert. One of the things I want to bring to your attention is that in our MOU, we have a salary note that protects our salary when things like this happen under no control of our own, which means that the salary note specifies that we get to maintain our salary when we're moved into this new position. So I want to bring that to your attention, but also to let you know that we are shrinking a pool of talented employees who've served 20-plus years in the city of LA. I personally have 25 years, and I was recently eliminated in my previous position. And I'll tell you, you walk down the hallway of the Board of Public Works, and there are no executive assistants there right now. It's empty. But who are helping your constituents? Who's there? Entry-level employees who do not know the city? So I plead with you to help my member, Lisa Ornelas, who couldn't be here today because her husband had a medical emergency yesterday, a serious medical emergency. Otherwise, she would have been right beside me speaking her case as well. So I thank you for this opportunity, but I ask you to help my member, Lisa Ornelas, get placed in a position and maintain her salary as well.
Let me just ask so we're clear.
Sure.
Is this the position that she's referring to that's Y-rated?
No, this is a different position. This is a position that would be displaced by the person that would be.
By the person that's
Bumping.
from the 3 positions?
Yes.
Now, what are the rules and such as far as the two that's being displaced? They go through a bumping process?
Yes, it's my understanding they would go through wherever they have seniority, and if they have a seniority in a different department, that's most likely where they would go.
Is this one of the positions that's Treasury specific, or is it?
No, this is a general classification.
Classification. And then what have we done in the past, although we're Y-rating one position, what have we done in the past about this displacement? Has that been a precedent as far as Y-rating?
No, it's my understanding, for the most part, if a person is displaced to a different department, it's been mostly at the same classification, the same pay grade.
Okay, so there's not a loss of pay, that's,
I wouldn't say, in the entire city that hasn't happened. I'm just saying for the most part, people go to whatever position they held before in that department.
so in this position, would that be available to the person being displaced?
I'm not familiar with the position. Is it executive administrative assistant?
Councilmember Sivanelli, City Treasurer. According to my understanding from the Personnel Department, based on their preliminary calculation, this position would revert to, or rather this person would revert to her old position in the Police Department, which was, I think, a secretary, and that she would be earning the wages for a secretary in the Police Department. That is my understanding.
What is the difference in the scale between secretary, where she's going and where she is?
It is based on what I've gathered. It's, I think, about 40% decline.
Interesting.
It's pretty significant.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Grant, you have to lead that discussion.
Yeah, actually, the first question I was going to ask is actually about that position. It strikes me as somewhat strange that you have two positions. One, the person's going to be paid the same salary, and another, they're taking almost a 50% cut. What's the justification for the differences in the two results?
I don't want to answer for the Office of Finance where the other person is going, but based on my understanding is that they determine their budget based on their ability and based on the budget that they're given. But I also understand that this position, this person is going to stay in the same class. The only difference is that the salary scale is going to be a little different, but then she's going to retain what she used to have. It's going to be the same class executive assistant, while the other position is actually going to a different class of a secretary as opposed to going to a class of executive assistant.
Do we have any ability to try and transfer someone to a position that wouldn't be such a demotion or such a cut in salary? It really doesn't seem very fair to handle it that way.
No, unless the person has some rights to that position, they can only go to a position that they've held before.
Do anyone here from personnel? One of the things, let me ask you, this has been a while, but is the secretary position is a feeder pool to the executive assistant? Is that it's a promotion?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and so what are the other feeder pool positions?
Management aid could go there as well.
And so there's several feeder, but that level would be around the same salary as the person as the secretary in the police department. Are they similar? The other feeder pool positions?
I didn't understand you.
No, the other feeder pool positions, are they similar in salary as the one we're talking about in the police department?
Yeah, they're almost. Management aid and the secretary, I think, is almost comparable.
You want to come up and comment on that?
Thank you. I do want to say that she held a management aide position as well, which is also a potential Y-rated position. So if she were to go into a management aide position, she would be able to maintain her salary. My main concern is finding a position for her where she gets to keep her salary.
Why
But-
did you say that management aid is potentially Y-rated?
Well, because that's one of those type of positions that when you promote into a management aide, whatever salary you're earning, you keep that salary as a management aide. So if she were to revert to a management aide, then it would be simpler as far as paperwork and how that position allows for the Y rate to allow her to go into that position and keep her salary. Whereas secretary, I'm not sure about that because it is a whole different salary.
But is management aid does she have status?
She does.
There is June. June. Hello? Maybe you could help us with this.
Are we talking about the management aide?
Yes, we're talking about the position of executive assistant 2 being displaced, 3 being Y-rated, and where the 2 that's being displaced goes. If they go to a secretary or management aide, there are 2 courses.
I have a concern about the management aide. That is a temporary training position, and the incumbent would have to promote out of that class within a 5-year period. So the notion of allowing her to, is the idea that she would be 10-14'd into the management aide? I'm not really quite sure, what the proposal is.
The suggestion was that they went to management aide and they were Y-rated in salary as to the 2 that they're currently in, as opposed to going to the secretary position and losing something like 40%.
I just don't believe that Y rating as a management aide makes sense. I'll be honest with you. Certainly that is an alternative that would have to be reviewed by the personnel department, given the fact that management aide is in fact a trainee position, and you have to promote out of it within the 5-year period. I suppose, that option is available, given that then, she'd have to take the management analyst exam and see whether or not she could promote out of it. I don't know whether or not the exam is going to be given, within the period of time. So, does the incumbent have status in that class right now? I'm not really quite sure, what the specifics are.
Do we know generally if there's any other executive assistant 2 positions that are open either within the city? Do we know if that's a classification that has a large number of positions?
My office worked with the personnel department. We were able to come up with one, but it was filled before she was able to interview for it.
What's the pool?
There was
several hundred? Is there only 5 or 6? How many people populate an executive assistant 2 position in the city? Do we know?
I think executive assistant 2s are generally executive assistants to smaller departments. If that is what the committee, if that's the direction that the committee is going, I think it would be worth our while to take a look at which positions are vacant. I'm assuming that based on this discussion, there have been no requests for unfreezes. But if that's an opportunity to allow this individual to be able to retain that class and pay grade, then we could look into that.
My concern is the 40%, if that's the figure that we have, that this person would be displaced and lose 40%. If there are available positions that are equal or can be transferred in other departments at the same level, that would be, in my judgment, a preference.
Okay. Well, maybe we can continue this particular item and then report back.
Now, what we want to do is if we move it and see if we can resolve it in flight.
Oh, sure.
Okay. All right.
That's even better.
Okay.
A couple other questions. In the report, you state that under the administrative division, the accounting functions currently under the finance administration will be moved into a combined accounting division within the Office of Finance. Then under the accounting division, you state that a new accounting division is created. Was it a mistake in the report to mention the new accounting function under the heading of administrative division, or is there really going to be an accounting function within the administrative division?
There's actually going to be a separate division, which is titled Accounting Division. And within that division, you will have general accounting, which basically is the day-to-day accounting that's done by all departmental accountants throughout the city. And then the other would be the treasury accounting, which is very unique to the treasury operations and the roles and responsibilities of the treasurer. So you'll have two separate units, general accounting and treasury accounting, reporting to a departmental chief accountant who will be the division head, who will in turn report to an assistant director of finance.
Okay. All right, I think that's the only question I have. Most of my questions were around the position that we're going to hold for further information.
Yeah, when we hold it for information, frankly, how do we avoid a 40% cut? I mean, that's the bottom line here. This person's been around us a long time. We're restructuring, I know, but this is too dramatic of a hit. Are we able to find a way to make that different?
Well, I think I'm certainly not the personnel expert. I think it's more of the personnel department, but I believe if there are opportunities outside of my department where there are...
June, you going to handle that?
She's going to look into that, I think.
Why don't you come up? I want to hear you on the record.
Okay. What's it about? Oh, yeah.
Bottom line is, I don't want to see her take a 40% hit.
Correct. And we understand that's the committee's goal, and so we are going to look at which vacancies are available amongst the departments. Another alternative would be to ask the CAO to activate a substitute authority. So, you know, there are different options that we're going to pursue, and we certainly are sensitive to the committee's instruction that we don't want the employee to take a 40% cut in pay. So.
Okay.
Is there a way to give direction that, I know we want to do this on the way to council, but if you're not able to come up with an alternative and you're going to still recommend this person getting a 40% cut, that it actually come back to committee, but that it only go to council if you've resolved the problem on the way?
If we could do two things. One, if we could send it to council, if they don't have it resolved, we can pull that item as one item. But I think
Right.
what we're trying to do is get the reorganization done.
Very cool.
That would be perfect.
Councilmember, I just want to say I do agree with bifurcating that item because there is another issue that, with regard to that position or that particular individual, that may not necessarily be discussed here, as it is a confidential issue that I may want to share with you later on.
Well, we can deal with that, but I think the key is, Jim, if you could work out that before it gets to council, or give us the options.
Yes.
Just as a note, Maria Gutierrez with the CAO's office, I would like to remind this committee that the whole intent of this function was to find efficiencies and save funding. Ultimately, this will likely be a policy issue for your committee, but for everybody you add back, we need to identify funding for it. And
I don't think we're trying to add it back. I think we're trying to find a placement of an existing position. That's what I understand we're trying to get done. Because we do want to hold on to the 1.4 savings.
okay, I was speaking, for example, if you authorize a substitute authority.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, but that, I think, if I understood what June's saying, that's something that may be temporary while you're waiting for a permanent placement. So that's what we're trying to resolve.
Okay.
Is that? Let me just ask a few dozen questions. I always like to see after that look like. Let me just ask one thing. Have we clarified this whole issue about removal because these two positions have different tracks? Has that been resolved, or we see that when the ordinance comes? Or?
Well, actually, it's my understanding that the ordinance was just issued today. It was, based on our cursory review of that, it has not been addressed there. I understand the city attorney is here, who could potentially address how that issue would be dealt with on a go-forward basis.
All right. Could we have a city attorney come tell us? So that's a major issue, that we have one body that can be removed in two different ways.
Good afternoon, Valentin Dino, City Attorney's Office. The CAO is correct. That issue was not specifically addressed in the ordinance. It is a charter issue. So basically, in order to reconcile, the cleanest way of doing it would be to have a charter amendment to reconcile the 301 with 508. But tentatively speaking, based on what we have here, because it's the two functions will reside in the same individual, pretty much the only way to effectuate the removal of one function would be to basically undo what you are going to do through this particular ordinance, split the two positions.
But I understood the charter is the authority to move the person as opposed to the function.
The function, the two functions are consolidated, will be consolidated.
But I don't think we want to unravel the consolidation because of the issue of what part of the person we move with what authority. I think the issue is we're combining them that will live beyond the current incumbent, but we need a process that says if it's inconsistent, how do we remove the body, not the function, not separate the function and say go back to two separate functions. But because in reality, if you even do that, it's still one person. That's what this ordinance is now saying. The Office of Finance and the City Treasurer are one and the same as to authorities vested in one position. So we just need to figure out how do we legally address that, because what I would not like, as we're waiting for the next charter change, that we'd have to stay with an interim treasurer as we're starting off July 1st and say that must stay in place until the charter change.
I don't believe that that will happen. What I'm going to do is consult with Pete and have an answer for you by the time this comes to council.
Because that's a big issue as to how we amend the ordinance that you propose. Let me ask the Office of Finance, the one thing in looking at your organization, the fact that you are asking that you remain the Office of Finance and position, the word treasurer kind of gets lost until you get into the body of the organization. And so I'm trying to figure out why don't we want to distinguish that both of those duties are clearly within your function to say Office of Finance / Treasurer, so that it's clear where both of those functions reside.
Well, we were actually just trying to basically save on any additional costs, to change a lot of the forms and other matters that we would have to notify the business community on the Office of Finance side, and then on the Treasury side, the banking folks.
I mean, could we do that incrementally? I mean, because the thing is that if we're going to make the move, the last thing you'd want is confusion as where the function resides. And if we don't put it on the organizational chart, it's kind of people guessing where it might be.
Well, I also, one of the things that we wanted to do is that we thought that, as other cities where the Director of Finance or the CFO also serves as a treasurer, that would be addressed through the ordinance, which I haven't seen. I just had a cursory review of the ordinance, so I haven't really had a chance to review it in detail. But I think it clearly denotes the responsibilities of the Director of Finance and treasurer. In terms
but most people aren't going to pull that ordinance. Mm-hmm. The concern I have is that if you're working within the city and trying to figure out where a function, if it's not on the organizational chart, no one's going to go find the ordinance or read through 3 levels of the organization and say, oh, here's the treasurer. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm trying to find out why we were, is it just a cost on paper that we're talking about? What was the rationale?
Well, also, sir, if you look at the charter as it was approved, it clearly denotes that the treasury functions are within Office of Finance. So it always had Office of Finance as one office, and it was titled as such. So we were also trying to be consistent with what was in the charter. We can denote on the organizational chart that the director will also serve as a treasurer, unless you want to change it.
No, the thing is, I'm trying to make it clear that the person that's in charge of Office and Finance from July 1st on, is the city's Office of Finance and the treasurer. And the other one that was a little confusing is the assistant general manager, that we call them both assistant general managers of Office of Finance, without designating that one of them is actually the assistant treasurer, which may also be a reason why one makes a little more money than the other. And so that's what I was trying to figure out, why we were embedding it lower in the organization without the clarity that there's a distinction between the two assistant general managers, and that the general manager now has both functions. And the only way I could see it, because nobody's going to go pull all this documentation and look at the charter, look at the ordinance. They're going to look at the organization chart and say, where's the treasurer now? And so what I would, and CAO, I don't know whether there's a rationale why we would not want to make it more clear, but just to look at it and see how we designate, if we're going to make that change, that it should be very, very graphic where that function currently resides.
Well, I understand your concerns. I think the way that we intended to have that addressed was, for example, if the treasurer was required to sign bond documentation, the signature would be city treasurer. So as the director of finance would sign as city treasurer based on the whatever documentation he or she would be signing, it would be dealt with the same way with the assistant director of finance, who would also function as assistant treasurer, that in cases of all treasury related items, that person would be signing as assistant treasurer. It could be handled either way.
What I was thinking for clarity, when you look at the organization chart, you say I have two assistant general managers, both of them are called assistant office of finance, but one of them has clearly a more distinctive function, and that's the treasury's function. They carry the assistant treasurer responsibility that you're going to designate, and the clarity of that, I think, would be important.
Sir, let me ask you a question. Would it be okay if on the organizational chart where you have director of finance also put down right below that city treasurer, and the same for where we have assistant director of finance, formerly assistant treasurer, also have assistant director of finance and delegated assistant treasurer? Something.
I think we got to identify where those responsibilities lie.
We can note that on the organizational chart, if that helps.
I think that would be very helpful, so that when people are looking for it, we know we've merged the two, but when they look for it, you go to the organization, and I think by title, it would be for your position, it should carry that dual title. It should carry Office of Finance / City Treasurer.
When I'm signing things for the director of finance, it would say director of finance or treasurer.
The forms you sign are immaterial to me. The title of the position and the title of the one assistant general manager, so they'd know that that's the place where it resides, the treasurer's responsibility. What forms you sign and the label under them are less important to me.
Okay.
Then let me just ask, where's the city attorney? Let me just ask, have we, with the ordinance that you presented, other than the position of how we remove the general manager, are there any other legal issues that have not been addressed by the ordinance that's been given to us today?
I'm not aware of any such issue. Of course, if there is any cleanup that needs to be done afterwards, we can always take another look at it and have basically a subsequent ordinance that would take care of any loose ends. However, the ordinance itself is not before the committee. We filed it today, so the committee can choose to waive it to council.
Yeah, but I want to make sure if we waive it, it's covering everything with the exception of the issue we spoke about earlier on the dual track to remove the position.
I believe it does, and if there is any issue, I'll present it to the full council when this comes up. And like I said, I'll talk to Pete in between.
Let me just ask, Antoinette, any additional fiduciary responsibility that comes forward from the treasurer's position that we have to be concerned with in assigning them to your position? Is there any other requirement for education, certificates, or anything like that?
No, there is not, sir.
And then we're also going to get a CAO report in the future on the whole issue of debt management. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And then what are the issues that need to be resolved with general services and ITA?
Well, there are a couple of things we need to look at. Of course, what's really great is that the Treasurer's Office is co-located on the same floor with the Office of Finance. But with the General Accounting and Division, we want the General Accounting Unit, we want all of the accountants to be in the same location. So there may be some relocating of folks that are on the finance side of the wall to move over to the treasury side of the wall, which really isn't going to be major. So there are minor things there. And then on the systems side, the system staff that are currently with treasury, what I would like my director of systems to do is to determine if any or all of the system staff would move out to the Garland building, which is where the entire systems division is located. So that may require change. There are also changes relative to signage that we need to address. And on the ITA side, there may be some phone services that will be required, as well as the internet, the city's internet. We'll need to update that as well.
If there's no other question, we'll move.
I have a couple other modest questions. Your report says the proposed structure of the Office of Finance is subject to change by the Director of Finance. Is this intended to be with council input or just done unilaterally?
Oh, absolutely, sir. With the Office of Finance, over time, we have reorganized to become more efficient. And as a result of that, the organizational chart would change, but we submit that as part of the budget. So if any changes are made, it would be subject to budget approval.
Okay, and what position will be allocated to the Revenue Management Division, which is handling the accounts receivable citywide improvement initiatives that were recently approved by the City Council?
The Revenue Management Division has not changed. It currently reports to the current Assistant Director of Finance. The benefit with the consolidation is that the current Assistant Director of Finance is over the Admin Division. And as part of this proposal, we're moving the Admin Division to the new Assistant Director of Finance, formerly Assistant Treasurer, which will allow the incumbent Assistant Director of Finance to focus more on revenue management, working with the revenue manager within the Revenue Management Division.
So you think the job can be done adequately without adding new people in that
Absolutely, because it will allow more time for the Assistant Director of Finance to focus on the initiatives that were approved by your body.
Great. Thank you.
We'll move this item on the approval of the CAO Finance and Treasurer's report. We also request the City Attorney to expedite all needed ordinances and to review this item one that was given to us today to make sure it covers all of the issues. We'd also ask the City Attorney to be prepared to discuss at Council the issue of resolving the removal issue within the Merge Department. We'll also ask that we get a follow-up report as part of the financial status as this is completed, and a couple other directions that we need to have the ITA and General Services work with Office of Finance to resolve those pending issues so they can become operational within July of this year. And also ask the Office of Finance to evaluate the title of the General Manager's position and the Assistant General Manager to include the Treasurer's function within those two positions for the organizational chart. And then we ask the CLA, at the time this comes to Council, to provide us options as it relates to the Executive Assistant 2 position that's being displaced so that we can attempt to resolve that as relates to her future placement. Any other issues?
Nope.
Okay, we'll move it with those instructions.
Thank you.
And we'll waive this ordinance that was given to us today with the hope that we can get some validation that it covers all of the pending issues.
That brings us to item number 8, Housing Community and Economic Development Committee report and the City Administrative Officer report relative to a request to approve a panel of consultants for the Office of Economic Analysis.
Let me just add one thing for the clerk. On that last one, I forgot one instruction. That we asked the CAO is going to give us back a report dealing with the special fund and also the debt management report. You're staring at me. Okay, number 8.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Madeline Rackley. I'm with the Office of the City Administrative Officer. I'd like to start with a brief history of this
Let me just interrupt you one time.
Pardon me.
Do we have to close down the 2 committees because that was, item 1 was the only one? And just go during the special, and then we'll go to budget and finance.
Okay, cool. I'd like to start by giving you a brief history of the Office of Economic Analysis project, which will put the report before you today in a little bit of context. In November of 2009, the council adopted a motion which directed the chief legislative analyst and my office, in conjunction with the city attorney and various stakeholders, to report back to this committee on a proposal to develop a group that would be responsible for economic impact analysis, and also to report on a process to incorporate the use of economic impact analysis in the legislative decision-making process. The motion requested that the report be based on the practices established by the City and County of San Francisco, which has had an Office of Economic Analysis since 2004. The report by the CAO and the CLA was presented in June of 2010, and the council adopted the report in July. The 3 recommendations included, first, establishing this new Office of Economic Analysis as a pilot in the CAO, and then authorizing the CAO to prepare and release an RFQ to establish a panel of as-needed economists, to request that funding in the amount of $250,000 from Council District 13 Assembly Bill 1290 funds be provided to start off the pilot, and the CAO was also asked to report to the council 1 year from the date of approval of the pilot. The second recommendation was to consider establishing the Office of Economic Analysis in a new Department of Economic Development, with the functions, duties, and criteria for its operation to be similar to this Office of Economic Analysis in San Francisco. And the third recommendation of that report was to report back quarterly to Jobs Committee on the process of the pilot. The report before you today is a result of the recommendations approved in that June 2010 CLA and CAO report. Consequently, in November last year, the CAO issued a request for qualifications to establish a list of on-call consultants to perform economic analysis for the city. The selected firms or individuals would be retained on an as-needed and as-requested basis. A letter regarding the availability of the RFQ was mailed to 48 prospective proposers. In addition, the RFQ was posted on the city's website and in the Daily Journal. The CAO received 16 responses by the December 2000 due date. After an initial evaluation, we determined that 3 firms were not responsive to the RFQ. The remaining 13 proposals were reviewed and evaluated by representatives from the CAO, the CLA, the airport, and the harbor. We conducted interviews with those 13 firms in February and March of this year. the review team placed the 13 firms into 8 service categories based on their written proposals and their interviews. And this would function this way. When we get a request for to do an economic study, we would issue a request for bids to the firms in those that have the expertise in the categories that best match the content of the request. We thought that this would be would streamline the process because the RFBs, this request for bids, would only be sent to the consultants with the most experience in the area of the request. So the report before you includes a request for council to approve the results of our RFQ process, approve the panel of the 13 consultants and the 8 service categories, and authorize the CAO to enter into contracts with those 13 consultants. In addition, the CAO report requests a transfer of the $250,000 from Council District 13 Assembly Bill 1290 funds to the CAO per the related motion. And the report also instructs the CAO to report quarterly on the status of the pilot. Finally, the report before you includes recommendations for criteria and a methodology for evaluating the requests for economic studies. The proposed criteria were based on instructions from Council to evaluate the San Francisco Office of Economic Analysis and to use that model as a starting place for the Los Angeles Office of Economic Analysis. And the idea here was to use best practices and insight from what this Office of Economic Analysis in San Francisco has done for more than 5 years. So the purpose of the criteria is to select studies during this pilot that will provide the most valuable and strategic economic impact for the legislative decision-making process for you, especially given the city's financial constraints. Then at the end of the one-year pilot, the CAO will analyze and report on the project based on the experiences of the mayor, the council, the participation of the on-call economists, and affected city departments and businesses which have taken part in the pilot. So that's a history of the project and a summary of the report that is before you. And I am here to answer any questions you may have.
Just a couple of concerns. One is that when you get to the request in Section 8 criteria,
yes,
council should be added to that.
For
city council on the Section 8 criteria. City council ought to be one of those criteria that we could request that analysis. So I was going to suggest that. And then also that if it's legal, if there's a proponent of a project and they wish to fund it, they should be allowed to pay the cost to do that.
I'm sorry, say that again.
If there's a project, say AEG, for instance, and they wish to have that analysis done, that they could pay for that, or we could ask them to pay for that as an option.
Certainly, we can evaluate outside sources of funding. One of the objects of this is to make sure that you are comfortable that the analysis is independent, so that you are getting the best information you can get on from them. So absolutely, if there's a funding source, we will take a look at it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We just want to make sure.
Like we do EIRs, so here's,
exactly, exactly.
Okay, and then the last concern was the city attorney having an ability to kind of slow projects down, or sometimes they take a long time to get things through there. So what options do we have in bypassing city attorney or moving the city attorney along?
Sure. And this is, you're looking at the criteria where legislation or that has been reviewed by the city attorney. Is that the item you're referring to? And maybe we can figure out better language, but here's the context for that. As we were speaking with the staff from the San Francisco Office of Economic Analysis, their experience was there were two different kinds of help that they could ask for from these economists. They could hire an economist to do research and do what-ifs to help develop policies. So you could hire an economist to say, if we were to do a certain project, help us write the language to come up, to write the best language for that. That's sort of research. Then there's the analysis side of the work, and that is you have a piece of legislation or a project or something that is already written, and the economist then has a very clear idea of what they're analyzing, and they're not doing what-ifs. So we'd have to figure out a way to give the economists enough concrete language so they knew exactly what to analyze, and they weren't doing what if, if the council means 50, then it's this. If they mean 100, if it's this. If it's 1,000,000, it's this. And that's the kind of language that we are looking for. So if there's a different way we can say that, we'd be happy to entertain that. But that's the context of that. So we give the economist something concrete to analyze.
Okay. Well, I think when we see some final language on that, that'll...
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the issue that Mr. Smith raised, is that the same issue that the CLA had? The CLA here that could speak to this on your concern with anybody, CLA? There you go.
I think
Greg's issue takes care of that? Yeah, I was going to... Mr. Smith asked that we add the city council to that criteria. Does that address your concerns?
I think we would need a little more information in terms of how the city council would be added to the criteria. It would depend. I mean, what our office's recommendation to the committee is to actually use this more as a guide as opposed to criteria. We believe that the criteria is a bit restrictive on the policy powers of the council in terms of indicating what projects can and cannot be evaluated. Since this is a pilot project, we expected, like most pilot projects, that this would take 8 votes of the city council to get a project through. And if at that point, 6 months into the project, the council needed, or the CAO's office needs more restrictions, or they need more funding, or more staff, they would return to the council and request that at that time. But in terms of starting this out, it seems, in talking to the CAO's office, that this is modeled off of the San Francisco model. And so we want to make sure that we have a model that works exactly for LA. And so doing that, we want to make sure that you have as much flexibility as possible in terms of selecting projects for analysis or legislation for analysis prior to establishing a strict criteria that would apply to all projects and legislation considered.
So by adding that the city council also has the ability to, on the criteria, does that really address some of your concerns? Not really, right?
That's correct.
It doesn't really address it because we still won't have that flexibility?
If you add an option to this that the city council, if a project that's submitted doesn't necessarily meet this criteria, and you add an option that the city council is able to, override this or select projects that don't necessarily meet this on a case-by-case basis, then that would, we believe that that would kind of override the concerns that we have with this criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just a question on the funding. I think the report says that additional funds may be needed and the actual cost of the pilot program is unknown.
Correct.
How much more could we need, and where are we anticipating getting the funds for it?
We don't know how much we will need because we don't know the nature of the requests that are going to come to us, and the types of requests could range from a $10,000 project to, $100,000 project. We just don't know until we get the requests. So that's why we can't really address future costs right now. But we do have, we are looking at other sources of funding. We do have a motion that directs the CLA and the CAO to look for more funding for this project.
So I assume this isn't just an unlimited approval. When we hit the 250, we're going to look for other sources of funding.
Correct.
We're not just going to take it out of the general fund.
No. We at this moment, we have $250,000 available for the project.
Councilmember, if I may, this panel is like a as-needed panel. As projects come up with identified funding for a study, that's what would allow the additional studies to be done. So we have to depend on the projects that want to be studied and funding to be identified at that point.
So we'll do it project by project. We're not going to spend first and then.
No. Here's how we envision this working. We will get requests from council for economic studies, and we will put those out to a secondary bid process to the economists that are on this list, and they will come back to us and say this project will cost $5 or $10 or $1 million, and it will take us 1 day or 3 days or a month, and then we'll know how much that will cost. But we'll do this on a case by case basis.
And on an ongoing basis, and this is a pilot, but it's a program that presumably we'll like and want to continue. Are we anticipating a particular source of funding on an ongoing basis?
The CLA and the CAO are actually working on a longer-term source of funding. We don't know yet.
So we haven't identified any sources.
We are just beginning to look. So there are some possibilities, but we're not done looking yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Let me just ask a couple of questions. So I'm clear on Mr. Smith's earlier comment. We're going to amend the criteria to add projects directed by the City Council. So but it must that would be number 4. But any of those top 4 would have to meet the criteria below there. Okay. So then, therefore, we can approve the CAO's report recommendations as amended.
So may I just make sure I understood? So you're adding it to item A, it would be A number 4.
Number 4,
okay, great.
Projects directed by the City Council, which then, when we go to the CAO's report number 3, we can adopt proposed amended criteria and the methodology. So we just changed that wording in number 3 so that now can clarify what we're trying to get to with Mr. Smith's recommendation. The other thing, let me ask the CAO, could you give us any rationale why on your list of 7 or 8 titles of types of things you might study, public safety was not mentioned? And it's like 70% of our budget.
Hold on just a second. Don't go away.
What we call under your categories.
Right. You know, that's very interesting. In all of the interviews we did, I don't believe we had a case of public safety for economic analysis. But what we would do is we can add that to our list. This is easy to do.
Okay.
No problem. We will add.
It's looking at their day-to-day operations, but there may be issues in which you lose something or want to basically merge it, or you want to look at things of that nature. But public safety seems like we almost have to have a category.
Absolutely, we can.
Is that all to the people that have applied for the RFP? Is the expertise?
You know, we will make this work. We'll figure out a place to put it, and
Okay.
do not worry, we will make it work.
That's very good.
We should assign you to the
we-
city
I can
attorney's
make
office.
never 33 years I've never heard that before.
I am sure we can figure out. So just figure out. It could be like legislation and policy or something like that. But we can take care of that as an
Category of
yeah.
services that we include some reference to public
Yeah,
service.
we can work that in.
And then
No
we-
worries, no
We
worries.
captured Mr. Smith's motion, and then we'd approve basically the CAO's report and its 5 recommendations, with number 3 being we amend the criteria to add a 4th criteria.
Just so that we're perfectly clear, on, I believe Mr. Smith's proposal was on recommendation 3 of the report to add requests made by the city council. So therefore, you wouldn't necessarily need to add it to any of the criteria, because there's 2 criteria components in the report. I think you're only adding it to recommendation number 3 of the report.
But I think the way I read 3 is that we're adopting proposed criteria and methodology.
Right.
Criteria is what he's adding to,
Right, and so
not
with
the methodology.
So within recommendation number 3, it would say, or requests made by the city council.
But that would be the 4th criteria.
It would be embedded within recommendation number 3. Number 3 talks about 2 criteria that would need to be met. But I believe Mr. Smith's proposal was to say, in addition to the criteria, but it would be more than the request categories, because it would also give you discretion on the second categories. There's 2 different categories for criteria. There's the request categories, and then there's the other, I don't
Material
remember the
impact
title.
category. Mhm.
So I believe Mr. Smith's proposal is that you would have these criteria, but in addition to that, any other requests made by the council, you could request such an economic analysis.
That would be number 4.
That would be in recommendation number
No,
3.
not recommendation 4, but if I read the notes.
But if you include a criteria 4 under.
It's okay.
Yeah, if you include item 4 in criteria A, that means criteria B must also be met.
Well, no, that's what we're saying. We're saying that.
If that's what you're doing, that's different.
No, I think what I understood him to say is that under criteria, you have 3 categories for criteria at this time. He was adding a 4th that said directed by the city council. When you do that, you still have to meet the subsequent 4 under that. to
That's
still-
correct. And that would be more limiting, but if that is the council's decision to be more limiting,
Even though he's adding directed by?
yes, because then if you're directing it by council under A,
Yes.
then you would still have to meet the criteria listed in B.
Let me ask you, I don't, from my perspective.
So it
maybe
would be
Mr.
more limiting, so.
Okay, Mr. Smith can comment on it. I would think that under those criteria of 10 million or more or not an appropriation, those would be standard for any of the 4 above criteria. I don't know whether you look at that as more limited.
Is that a problem? That's the question.
Yeah, and so-
Does that restrict us too much?
Yeah, and that's the question. And that's a policy decision for this council to make. If the amendment were made in recommendation 3 of the committee report, I believe that gives you the broadest discretion.
Okay, now how would we work, because what I thought in amending number 3, that we were amending by adding his 4th criteria.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be a 4th criteria. It would just say, or,
Okay.
as directed by the
So
council.
we adopt the proposed criteria and methodology and amended by adding council direct.
That would give you the broadest discretion, yes.
Okay, what happened?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, the only problem with that, then you might get into some really frivolous reviews
Yeah, that's what I think.
that are not really legitimate in
Yeah,
nature.
That's why I thought
Yeah.
the second half was important.
Right.
Yeah.
Council members, obviously, we will do what you direct us to do, but the way we came up with that criteria was based on the experiences of the city and county of San Francisco, we will evaluate the criteria during the pilot and at the end of the pilot. If this is a disaster, we will adjust as we go or adjust at the end of the pilot. We certainly, the point of having the criteria in the first place is to make sure we get the most bang for our buck for the pilot. After the pilot is over, we can do whatever we want, truly.
So we do want to leave the criteria there, otherwise you get into all kind of frivolous.
So the 4 at the bottom.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think all of this is going to come back to the council anyways, and so that's why, if it were
We want it to be in the
broad,
right direction.
pardon?
We want it to be in the right direction.
Yes, but
Broad
and it would come
authority,
back to you.
But not without those criteria.
Right. So it is, at the end of the day, it is a decision of the policy-making body. So if that is your choice, then, you know, that would give you a little bit less discretion in order, if you were to add it as a criteria 4 under A, that would give you less discretion. More discretion would be to amend recommendation 3, and that is a decision of the policymakers to make.
Let me ask you, that's what I thought you said.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought you
I'm only
added
here to
the
add
4th
confusion
criteria
to the whole
and you
thing.
left the bottom criteria in play.
We leave the bottom in play.
Okay. The 4 below.
Right.
And you add a 4th one to the A column that says directed to
Right.
council.
That would be less discretion, but gives you some
So
discretion.
you're amending 3 to add a 4th item to category A,
Right.
and you're leaving category B the same.
I think that's what we started.
You're good.
That's what I thought he said.
That's right. I think that's where we started.
I should have
believe
done
that
it differently.
So that's okay.
I believe that is where you started, but we were trying to give you the greatest discretion possible, but that is your choice.
Okay, then we're gonna add public safety to the criteria.
Yes, sir.
Categories of service.
We'll do that. Just consider it done.
All right.
We'll figure out a way to do that.
Let me ask you this, so that we're clear. Where does the CAO address the issues of the minority or women-owned companies in the contract?
Interestingly enough, when we hire prime contractors, we actually don't request minority or women-owned business information. It's when we ask them to subcontract that we ask for outreach to minority and women-owned businesses. If you want, I can find out what the status of these companies
I'd like to know that,
is.
and although we didn't ask for it.
We didn't ask for it, right.
I'd like to know when it comes to council if we have some idea of women-owned, minority-owned. I know that we can't, we can ask that information, we can't impose it, but it'd be good to know of what.
I will put that together by Wednesday. Yeah.
That would be all. Any other questions on this issue before we move this forward?
Just a sense of a timetable. When do you think we'll have an office up and running?
Well, you're looking at the office.
And I like it.
I
like what I'm looking
up
at.
and running.
You're very good.
You appear to be up and running.
That's an exaggeration. There's a whole bunch of people involved in this process.
What's your sense of a time?
As soon as council adopts the recommendations, then we're in business. So we will have the $250,000. We will have access to these 13 companies, and my office will be open for applications. So.
And then the applications happen. I mean, I want to know.
Oh, the process.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So council will submit requests to the Office of Economic Analysis. We will determine which category or categories they most fall into, including public safety, and then we will request the companies in those categories to submit a secondary bid, and we will have a short turnaround time and limited, this is not going to be a big deal, and they will need to tell us how much it will cost and how long it will take and why they should be selected, and then we will contract with the least expensive, most qualified respondent, and we're good. We will also
Who will make that decision?
And you're designating us, the CAO, to make that decision. Part of this process is that the CAO, Office of Economic Analysis, will issue the requests for bids and evaluate them and select the contractors. And then part of the deliverable is that the council gets a report back. I mean, the whole point of this is to give you information. So you will get a report that identifies risks and provides information to you about this item so that you can then make an informed decision. You don't have to take the advice, but you will have it. And so the whole point of this is to make it possible for you to know the impact of your decisions, you know, the economic impact. So.
And when Joe Chesak, you know, who's now the chairman of the board of what is it, whatever that is, Chamber, was one of his exciting concepts after seeing Chicago, seeing what's going on in San Francisco and other places. Has the private sector been engaged with you on how you're moving forward with this, and are they pleased? Just curious.
I believe the chamber has been involved and has some thoughts about that, and I believe there's a representative from the chamber here who could probably speak better to that. But we have tried to make this as transparent and independent an event as possible. Again, the point is to provide the council with the best information possible.
I agree.
And independent information possible. So we want to make sure that we are good, you know, that this is a good experience for everyone. So anyway, but the chamber has been involved, I know, and yeah.
Because they are the ones who are very excited about bringing it to us. I think it's a win-win for everybody, frankly. I don't know of any downside on it. It can only help us be more effective and more responsible to our people out there. Okay, thank you.
Before we get, let me ask if Marcel Paris come up, and also Beverly Kinworthy.
Good afternoon, Marcel Porra, Senior Planning and Economic Development Deputy for Council President Garcetti. Just wanted to thank the CAO's office and the CLA's office for their work on this, as well as the LA Chamber for partnering with our office on this initiative. And definitely wanted to thank the committee for their recommendations on the criteria. The criteria is an integral part of this program. We feel and we look forward to the establishment, the final establishment of the Office of Economic Analysis as a way to impart impartial information to the council to make informed decisions on projects and policies that will focus on creating jobs here in Los Angeles.
Beverly Kenworthy with the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for having us here today, and thank you for the CAO and the CLA. I know they've worked really hard on this. As you indicated, this has been a project that the Chamber's been very excited about, and the idea behind it is really just that, information, objective information, and which is why we strongly believe in the criteria. We're concerned that if there's no criteria, then it's just anybody on a whim can just say, and it has no impact to the city, and then we're wasting valuable resources that have been dedicated generously by Councilmember Garcetti. So we appreciate Council Smith's amendment. We can absolutely support that, and but if you eliminate the criteria, I think the Chamber can no longer support this because it no longer is meeting the intent that we've been championing for the past almost 2 years now. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Let me see if I can capture everything. We'll move this item and adopt the CAO's recommendations 1 through 6 on their report, with number 3 as amended by Mr. Smith's addition of a 4th category to Section A, allowing Section B to remain as reported. Also, instruction to the CAO to bring forth at council the information on the 13 consultants as to their minority and female ownership and participation. That we also add to the categories of service, public safety. Also that that we amend recommendation 2 to reflect that the 13 consultants for category service are listed, quote, in the findings section of the report. I think that pretty much
correct. Thank you.
Covers think that covers everything. So without those instructions, we'd ask that we approve the CAO report as amended.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes it. We have no other items, and so we are adjourned. Yay.